Hi guys, it's Amy and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. I hope that you're doing well. Let me know how you're doing in the comments. Today we are continuing with this fantasy romance series. If you missed last week's video, it is the YA edition, and today we are talking about the cozy fantasy romances that I have read. This is a bigger list because I really enjoy cozy fantasy. There just happens to be a lot of romance subplots within these fantasies, and some of them it's even the more central focus of the story. If you missed my previous video, I was talking about how I really didn't consider myself a fantasy romance reader, but it's kind of snuck its way into my reading, and with these lists you'll see that I am definitely full on admitting I am a fantasy romance reader. So we're gonna get into this list, so get cozy with me, grab a drink, I've got my iced matcha here, and let's get into cozy fantasy romance. So with this list, I do have some physical copies and some that I don't personally have, so I'm kind of going back and forth, but I wanted to try to show you as much as possible what I have in my collection. We are starting with Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. And this is kind of like a Jane Austen take on cozy fantasy romance. And if you're a fan of Jane Austen, you know we're kind of dealing with Regency era England, specifically in London in this story. We are following a young girl who is living in London with her aunt and cousins, and she was cursed where she literally has half a soul, and so she doesn't experience human emotions like the typical human would, and it kind of makes her awkward and definitely kind of on the outskirts of society. But she is trying to help her cousin in the marriage market of the day and try to help her get a spouse, but her cousin's kind of trying to do that in reverse for her. But in all of the antics going on, we happen to meet the court magician, the Lord Sorcerer as he is called, and he is definitely like a Howl from Howl's Moving Castle kind of character. He's a little bit grumpy and a little bit unpredictable. He meets our main character and they kind of develop a friendship, a reluctant friendship. But with this story, we have a really sweet romance, but we also have some social commentary, especially of the day, like how the poor were treated and how people who are different with maybe disabilities or with sicknesses, even down to orphans, how they were treated and ostracized in society. And it really just gives the book that much more depth, and I really appreciated that about the story. We definitely have fae in this series. This is called the Regency Fairy Tale series. This is the first book. I have not read the other books. I have heard some good things about them, but I know that this one is definitely loved, and for very good reason. So I definitely describe this as Jane Austen cozy fantasy with a little bit of Alice in Wonderland vibes when it comes to the fae realm in this book. And I know I've kind of described quite a bit. I don't want to give anything else away, but just know that if you're looking for a romance that is really sweet and tender, there's no spice in this book, then I would recommend this for you. Next up, we have a book that has all the cozy fall vibes, and that is A Dark and Secret Magic by Wallace Kinney. This is kind of a Hades and Persephone inspired romance, but we have a lot of other things going on besides the romance in this story. But we're following a plant witch who is kind of acting as a healer for her town. She makes tonics and potions and poultices, and she really loves her small community that she is a part of. And it's a really cozy, warm kind of place, perfect for the fall or Halloween time. We have fall festivals and all kinds of activities, but even with all of the cozy vibes, there is a darker edge to this story. So we have someone from her past that comes to visit, and she kind of has to partner up with in order to try to defeat some of the evil things going on in her town. And family secrets and secrets from the coven that she's a part of come to light. She is all having to navigate this around her birthday. So there is a little bit of chaos going on, and we do get some higher stakes, and there's a little bit of dark and witchy magic in here. So I really loved the balance of cozy and then kind of dark and brooding at the same time. It just really had a great balance, and you have the romance right in there kind of melding everything together. This does have some closed door spice, so just be aware of that. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars and definitely recommend for the fall time. Next, we have The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. And this is a really fun, funny, cozy fantasy that has a subplot of romance. So this book is taking place in our world, but witches exist, and witches are not really allowed to get together or live together, exist together, because it's very dangerous due to their magic, but they do meet up like every few months in sort of like regional covens. So we're following our main character who is kind of lonely, and she decides to pretend to be a fake witch on social media, and someone comes across her content and says, "Hey, I actually know that you're a real witch, and I need you to help me train these 3 young girls that are in my care because their magic is not in control and kind of chaotic, and we are not wanting to cause anyone danger or a situation." So she decides to take up the deal and go find this kind of found family she comes to discover that are caring for these 3 young witches. This is definitely like sweet and sassy and very humorous. We have 3 kids who kind of talk like they know a little bit more of the world than your typical kid, but we have kind of a ragtag group of people who are living together in this household who are protecting these 3 young witches, and it's just a really sweet group of people. And we see our main character kind of be ingrained into this family, and we have kind of a grumpy sunshine sort of romance that is happening in the background. This is really cute and funny and magical and uplifting. And with our romance, it's kind of a grumpy sunshine sort of situation. And there is some open door spice in this, so just be aware of that. But I gave this 3 stars, and I would definitely recommend if you want something that has found family. There is also a sequel that is coming out. It is coming out July 15th of 2025, and it is called A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. So if you enjoyed this book, you can get more of it in July, and I definitely am excited to read the next book. Speaking of funny books, The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton is absolutely hilarious. It had me laughing out loud. This is kind of a historical fantasy romance. It definitely has cozy vibes to it because it's very lighthearted, but we are following a young woman who is literally a criminal, part of a criminal society of women, and they definitely give pirate vibes. They have flying houses instead of ships, and we're living in like Victorian England, and it is all just filled with shenanigans and kind of comical backstabbing. It is definitely chaotic, but it is so much fun. And in this story, we have an assassin that is coming after her, sent by another criminal. So she is being chased down by this assassin, and they kind of form an unlikely bond. Again, this is a very chaotic, pirate-like story. It is just filled with shenanigans and sky-high kind of heists as we're flying around in the sky in our houses and manors. We do have a villain character in here as well, but getting down to the romance, we do have a really fun chemistry and banter between the 2 characters. So if you're a fan of that and a little bit of innuendo humor, you would probably enjoy this. And this does have a bit of spice in here, so just be aware of that. But this was definitely a 5-star read for me, and there are other books in this series. I read the second one. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but if you like this and are wanting a little bit more, there are more books in this series. Next up, we have a series that I absolutely love, and the final book of this cozy fantasy trilogy just came out. I only have the first 2 books, but that is the Emily Wilde series by Heather Fawcett. So we have the Encyclopedia of Fairies, we have the Map of Other Lands, and the 3rd book, the Compendium of Lost Tales. I have read all 3 of these, and I absolutely love this series. I would give it a 5 stars for the series as a whole. I gave the first 2 books 5 stars. I just loved these equally. The 3rd book I read an arc of, and I gave it 4 stars, but I still highly recommend it, even though it wasn't my favorite of the trilogy. I think maybe it was just my personal reading experience. I was a little bit removed from the previous books, but I still really enjoyed it. It kind of takes the story to a new level, but let's get into what it's about. So this is a cozy fantasy with kind of like academia vibes, and we have fairy folklore. So we are following Emily Wilde, who is a scholar at the University of Cambridge, where she studies dryadology, or the study of fae. And these stories are about kind of these scholarly journeys that she goes on in order to study the fae in their natural environments. These stories are really charming, they're really atmospheric, and they're very whimsical in how we deal with the fae. It definitely gets nerdy about it. We're reading from like journal entry perspectives from our main character. Every once in a while we get another character as well, but mainly from Emily. And the story definitely doesn't surround romance, but it does have a really great romance plot in there. And it is with a academic rival of Emily's, Wendell, who is a bit chaotic, and he's kind of like the sunshine to her grumpy. She is a little bit awkward. She's very much an intellectual, but she's not really one to be super social. But I love how in this series she kind of opens up and makes friends, opens up to Wendell, her rival, and the relationship that they have. So even though this is cozy fantasy, we do have some higher stakes, definitely more as the story goes on throughout the trilogy. We definitely are dealing with kind of dark and dangerous fae, but I feel like that just adds so much more depth and interest to the story. So this is definitely for fans of cozy adventure, fae folklore, and slow burn romance. Next up is an ongoing series, and I have read the first book. The next book is to be coming out soon, and that is The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. This was definitely a really cozy and magical time. We are dealing with a librarian and libraries and magical grimoires, and we're dealing with kind of a small town, cozy island atmosphere. So we're following our main character, who is a librarian in a magical city, and she is kind of the caretaker for these magical spell books, grimoires in this library. And when her city is attacked, there is a fire in the library. She is having to make the quick decision to round up these spell books to protect them, and she has to basically escape the city, and she ends up going back to the cozy little island where she grew up. So we definitely have like another kind of nerdy, scholarly character, kind of like Emily Wilde. I feel like this character is a little bit more friendly, but we are using the spell books maybe when we shouldn't, and trying to help out this small town that we've kind of landed ourselves in. She's trying to navigate being in this small town and trying to kind of keep herself secret, but also ingratiate herself at the same time. And we definitely have an interesting romance that is a subplot within this that's really sweet and heartwarming. And we have really interesting magical creatures in this story as well. She has a sentient pet plant. He's a really cute character. This has a really unique sort of magic system coming from the spells in the books. I don't want to give too much away about it, but it definitely adds a layer of intrigue to the story. So this is definitely for fans of sort of magical shops, like bookshops, bakeries, and maybe even a jam shop. I don't want to give too much away about that, but you'll know when you read the book. If you just want cozy vibes and maybe kind of like lighthearted adventure with a subplot of romance, this is going to be perfect for you. Next up is a book that I absolutely loved, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is so cozy and heartwarming. We definitely have found family in this story, but we are following kind of a social caseworker who lives in a world where magical creatures, magical beings are kind of regulated by the government. And he is specifically in charge of trying to make sure that orphanages where magical children are kept are being run properly. So he is sent to a particular orphanage that has some questionable practices and trying to get more information about it. And what he finds is very unexpected. And we have some really interesting kids who you're absolutely going to love. They are all different kind of magical creatures and beings, and we kind of have an Antichrist character. So be aware of that. But it is extremely heartwarming and tugs on the heartstrings as well. And we do have a sort of subplot of a queer romance, and it is just very heartwarming and endearing. So this is really kind of showing the journey of opening up from being someone who is kind of grumpy, kind of has a sort of jaded take on the world, and seeing how they open up to love and friendship and family. And it's just an extremely heartwarming story. And like I said, the romance is definitely a subplot in this story, but it is still extremely heartwarming and I really, really loved it. There is also a sequel out, and this is actually supposed to be a series. I saw a talk of TJ Klune's where he said that he is actually working on the third book for this series, but the second book is out. I have not read it yet, but this is supposed to be a bit more about the caretaker in the first book, but this is Somewhere Beyond the Sea, and when you read the book, the first book, you'll see the significance of this title. But I am just so looking forward to reading this second book and getting more of this world. Another queer, cozy romance story is one that I read very recently. I read an arc of this. It came out March 4th of this year, 2025, and that is Homegrown Magic by Jamie Pacton and Rebecca Potos. So this definitely centers more around the romance of the story. I would even call this a cozy romantasy. And in this, we are following a plant witch who is trying to save her small town. And she ends up running into a former childhood friend who has run away from their responsibilities as a noble heir. So they're in this small town, and this noble heir is kind of needing a place to stay, and so she reluctantly agrees to let them work for her in her greenhouses. There is a lot of issues kind of going on under the surface and kind of threatens to tear our main characters apart. And that deals with financial issues, family issues, issues of duty, and even some betrayal in there. So there is definitely some intrigue in here. And we have our cozy town setting that we're in for most of the book. And then we kind of migrate over to a city. And it is just really interesting seeing kind of the depth that is layered into this story. But this is a spicy book. At least for me. There are multiple spicy scenes, so just be aware of that. But I just felt like this romance, even with the spice, I felt like it was still very grounded and they had a really good connection and chemistry. And you can definitely tell that they care about each other. So if you're wanting a queer fantasy romance where it's more focused on the romance, I would definitely recommend this. My last book on this list is a little bit of a deeper cut. It's a little bit of an older book, but it is absolutely fantastic. And that is Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. And this author has written more recent books, but this is a fantastic cozy fantasy. I would consider this a little bit more like magic realism, but we are following two estranged sisters who come back together in their southern, sleepy, small town, and they reconnect over their family's magic and a little bit of mystery. So we're definitely dealing with a little bit of heavier topics in this book. We definitely have some family drama, but we also have instances of SA and domestic violence. So just be aware of that. And this is obviously adult, and we're dealing with some spice as well. This story is definitely centered around family and kind of the small community that they live in, but we do have a subplot of romance, and it is a little bit spicy, but it's still really sweet and tender at the same time. This is definitely for fans of kind of a charming southern town setting, really subtle magic kind of centered around plants and sisterhood. All right, guys, that is my list. I feel like that is a pretty decent list to kind of get you into some cozy fantasy romance. If you have any other suggestions, definitely leave them in the comments. I want to know. I really love cozy fantasy with a little bit of romance in there. But let me know if you've read any of these, if you want to read any of them. Let's chat in the comments, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!